The center or not the center? That is the question.
Thanks, Boris. In this lecture, we'll be learning a little bit more about a topic that I've mentioned several times before. It's called centralization. The basic idea behind this principle is a little bit like the King of the Mountain game, which translated to chess terms, it would mean something like the closer your pieces are to the center, the stronger they become. We've already seen the basic idea. It goes like this. Those are the four central squares, and then we have the expanded center, and then we've got some squares which you don't really want for your pieces, the squares on the edge of the board. Now, that knight is in the corner, and that's why it only controls those two squares. Oops, not that one. Those two squares, which is not very much. But if we move that knight a little bit closer to the center, now it controls a few more. And this one as well. And if we move that knight to one of the central squares, look at that. It controls 8 different squares, which goes to show you what a big difference it can make to have your knight in the center or to have it in the corner or the edge of the board. Here's another example, this time with the bishop. This bishop is blocked by that pawn. It can only go to one square, g2. So we're going to try to make that bishop a little bit stronger. Can't do very much right now. But watch what happens when we move that bishop towards the center of the board. Look at that. Look at that now. That's a big diagonal. And right now it's in the center of the board. And if we remove this pawn from here, from f3, that's even more squares. Now, a word of caution regarding bishops. Sometimes a bishop from a very modest square can have a great impact on the position. Take a look at this position, for example. Now, this is a big mistake, and this modest bishop is going to come to g7, but before it does that, look at this move. Knight takes pawn, a sacrifice. It's not exactly a sacrifice, because if we take it, then the bishop comes to g7, and look at that. Beautiful bishop. So beware of bishops. They don't necessarily have to be centralized. Sometimes, from square like g7, g2, h2, and they control beautiful diagonals, and they can be incredibly strong. About the rook. Look at that rook in the corner. But it controls so many squares. The rook is a little bit special because it doesn't necessarily have to be centralized. For example, I can put it here, and it controls exactly the same number of squares than if I put it here in the middle of the board. Exactly the same number of squares. At the end of the day, what makes the difference is whether that rook has an open file or not. And if that rook is not being blocked by one of its own pawns. For example, here, this rook isn't doing very much. In fact, white would be better off without that pawn on c2. We don't have to remove that pawn though, because we can put the rook here, and then we've got a beautiful rook. The rook has been centralized, central file, and now the rook is coming to d7. And here, white played queen e2, then the bishop went to b7, and now white's rooks are connected, and as you can see, they're being blocked by those pawns, so we need to centralize them. This one should go here, and this one should go here. Beautiful open files for the rooks. Since black is probably threatening here, we should probably stop that by going rook e1 first, and when the black knight comes to c6, then we can go rook here. And the two rooks are now centralized. That's what you should do in your games. Centralize your rooks. Now here's another position. And sometimes it's not entirely clear where the rooks should go. It's pretty much a long-term thing. Like if you think the rook is going to be doing a lot on that file later on in the game, then you should put it on that file. Here, most probably those two are the right squares for the rooks. So rook here, rook c8 maybe, rook here. White's got a nice position, a little bit better. And about the queen, this queen from a2 controls all those squares. But if we centralize it, which is not bad, I must say, but if we centralize it, look at that, that's a lot more. And that's basically all you need to know about centralization. It's common sense, really. The closer your pieces are to the center, the better. And beware about putting your pieces on the edge of the board, because sometimes they get trapped or they don't do very much. They don't control many squares. So try to centralize them.